The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly in every direction, cold and silent. In the far reaches of the Helion Nebula, where few dared to venture, a lone spaceship, the Odysseus, drifted toward an abandoned moon. Its captain, Elias Grant, stood at the front of the cockpit, his sharp eyes fixed on the barren landscape below. "Are you sure about this, Captain?" His co-pilot, Sarah Holt, asked, her voice filled with unease. Elias didn't answer immediately. He had heard the rumors, stories about a sleeping titan, a forgotten god left to die on this lonely rock. Most called it a myth, a legend from a time long past. But his scanners told a different story. There was something down there. Something massive. "Unsure," he finally said, adjusting the ship's controls. "We're landing." Sarah sighed but said nothing more. The ship descended, dust rising as it touched the moon's cracked surface. Outside the window, a dark, towering shape lay ahead, a colossal figure, half buried in the rock and dust of centuries. Even from this distance, Elias could see that the being was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The crew stepped out cautiously, their boots crunching against the dry ground. The figure before them was gigantic, its form humanoid, but far too large to be anything natural. Its golden armor was cracked and broken, its once mighty wings reduced to skeletal remains. And deep in its back, two enormous swords were embedded, their dark blades humming with an eerie energy. "By the stars," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with awe. Elias stepped closer. Even in its broken state, the being radiated a quiet power, something ancient and almost divine. The legend was real. This was Oralisa, the last of the Celestera, a race thought to be long extinct. "She's still alive," Elias muttered, noticing the faint rise and fall of her massive chest. Sarah looked at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. She's been here for centuries." Elias ignored her doubt. Something inside him, something deeper than logic, told him that this being was not yet gone. He took another step forward, his heart pounding. As he reached out toward the hilt of one of the swords, a voice echoed in his mind, soft and broken. "Why have you come?" Elias froze. The voice wasn't coming from his communicator. It was inside his head. He turned back to Sarah, but she didn't seem to hear it. The voice was speaking only to him. Swallowing his fear, he answered aloud, "I want to help." Silence. Then, a whisper, filled with pain. "Help cannot be given. The blades, they bind me. They drain me." Elias glanced at the swords again. They were massive, too large for any human to wield, and covered in strange, glowing symbols. He reached out and placed a hand on the cold metal. A sudden wave of exhaustion hit him, as if the blade was pulling something from his very soul. He pulled his hand away, gasping. "These swords, they're keeping you weak." "Yes, but removing them is dangerous." Sarah stepped forward. "Elias, what are you doing?" He turned to her, determination in his eyes. "If we don't help her, she's going to stay trapped here forever." Sarah hesitated. "And if we do, what happens to us?" Elias looked back at the sleeping titan. He didn't know, but he had never been the type to walk away from someone in need, even if that someone was an ancient, forgotten god. Taking a deep breath, he wrapped both hands around the hilt of the first sword. Oralis's voice whispered again, this time softer. "Be warned, once you begin, there is no turning back." Elias pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening crack, the sword shifted. A shockwave exploded from the wound, throwing Elias backward. Sarah screamed as the ground trembled beneath them. And then, Oralisa moved. A low, pained groan escaped from her lips, her massive golden eyes flickering open for the first time in centuries. The power surrounding her grew, the air vibrating with an unseen force. Elias struggled to his feet, his heart pounding. He had done it. He had woken a god. But in the distance, beyond the dark clouds of space, something else had also awakened. The ones who had placed the swords in her back knew, and they were coming. Elias Grant's heart pounded as he watched the giant figure before him stir. Orlisa, the fallen titan, had been lifeless for centuries, but now, after he had pulled one of the cursed swords from her back, her golden eyes flickered open like dying stars reigniting. The ground trembled beneath her, and a strange energy crackled in the air, causing the dust around them to rise as if caught in a storm. Sarah Holt, Elias's co-pilot and closest friend, grabbed his arm. "Elias, what did you do?" Her voice was tight with fear. Elias barely heard her. His mind was still ringing from the force of the shockwave that had blasted through him the moment he touched the sword. He could feel a dull ache in his chest, as if something had been drained from him, but he didn't care. He had woken her up. Orlisa groaned, her voice deep and resonating, more felt than heard. Her colossal form shifted, and the dust of forgotten centuries cascaded off her armor like water. She tried to move, but the second sword still pinned her to the ground. "You removed one," Orlisa said, her voice weak but filled with something new, hope. Elias nodded. "Yeah, and I'll get rid of the other one too." Before he could step forward, a deep hum filled the air. His communicator crackled to life, and a robotic voice, cold and emotionless, spoke. "Unauthorized interference detected. Designation: human. Cease all activity or face extermination." Sarah gasped and pointed at the sky. Dark shapes loomed above the moon's surface. Siracian warships. Their sleek, dagger-like forms cut through the stars, descending rapidly. Elias's stomach twisted. "They got here fast," he muttered. Orlisa's eyes darkened. "They know. They always knew." Sarah pulled Elias back. "We need to leave now." Elias looked at Orlisa. She was still too weak, barely able to move. If they left, the Exarakians would finish what they started, and she would be lost again. No, he couldn't let that happen. He turned to Sarah. "Go back to the ship. Get the weapons online." Sarah hesitated. "Elias, go." She cursed under her breath, but ran back toward the Odysseus. Elias turned back to Orlisa and gripped the second sword. The dark metal was ice cold, and as soon as his hands touched it, his head throbbed with pain. Whispers filled his mind, hissing in an unknown language. It felt as if the blade itself was resisting him. "It is cursed." Orlisa gasped, her voice strained. "It will take more than strength." Elias gritted his teeth. "Then tell me what to do." Above them, the Exarakian warships opened fire. Energy blasts struck the moon's surface, shaking the ground. The Odysseus fired back, blue plasma streaking through the sky, striking one of the enemy ships. The battle had begun. Orlisa's voice, though weak, guided Elias. "The blade feeds on fear, on doubt. You must reject it." Elias growled and pulled harder. The whispers grew louder, trying to claw their way into his mind. His vision blurred. A wave of exhaustion washed over him. It was as if the blade was feeding on his very life. "Elias." Orlisa's voice rang through his mind, stronger this time. "Believe. Let it go." Elias clenched his jaw. He was human, and humans never gave up. With a roar, he tore the sword from her back. A shockwave of golden energy burst from Orlisa's body, blinding and unstoppable. The Exarakian warships trembled as their systems flickered. For a brief moment, the stars themselves seemed to shudder. Then the ground cracked beneath Elias's feet as Orlisa rose. Her full form towered over him, her golden armor gleaming with renewed power, her once broken wings unfurled, shimmering with celestial energy. Her eyes burned with a fire long thought extinguished. The last of the Celestora had returned. The Exarakians, once confident, hesitated. Their commander's voice crackled over their communications. Impossible. She was supposed to be dead. Orlisa lifted her hand, and the very air bent around her. A single pulse of energy shot forward, striking the nearest warship. The vessel exploded instantly, sending debris scattering across the sky. Elias grinned. Now that's what I call a comeback. Sarah's voice came through the communicator. Elias, what the hell is going on out there? He looked up at Oralisa as she hovered above the battlefield, golden energy swirling around her. She glanced down at him, and for the first time, there was something human in her gaze. Gratitude. You freed me, she said softly. Elias smirked. Yeah, well, let's hope it was the right choice. Oralisa turned toward the enemy fleet. Her voice, now strong and unshaken, echoed across the battlefield. Your time is over, Exarakians. The enemy warships, once so mighty, began to retreat. But Elias knew this wasn't the end. No, this was only the beginning. The Exarakians would return, and they wouldn't come alone. He exhaled slowly, watching Oralisa as she gazed into the endless void of space. For the first time in centuries, she was free. And for the first time in his life, Elias realized he had just made history. The battlefield was silent for a moment. The golden glow surrounding Oralisa, the last of the Celestera, flickered like a star reborn. Her massive wings stretched wide, their celestial energy pulsing through the air. She was awake. She was free. Elias Grant stood at the base of the crater where she had once lain, his breath heavy, his hands still tingling from pulling out the cursed swords. He had done the impossible. He had freed a forgotten titan from an eternal prison. Above them, the Exarakian fleet hesitated. These warlike conquerors, who had ruled the dark edges of the galaxy with fear, were now staring at something they thought could never rise again. Oralisa slowly turned her golden eyes toward Elias. You are different from the others. Elias swallowed. Yeah, well, humans don't like seeing people chained down. She watched him for a moment, something unreadable in her gaze. Then her expression hardened as she looked up at the Exarakian ships still circling above. Suddenly, a deep, growling voice boomed through the communication channels. Human, you do not understand what you have done. Elias's communicator crackled with static before stabilizing. A holographic image appeared before them. Lord Vorthag, Supreme Commander of the Exarakian fleet. His dark red, reptilian features twisted in fury. His golden battle armor gleamed under the cold light of distant stars. You have undone centuries of balance. Vorthag snarled, his sharp teeth bared. Do you think freeing her will bring you victory? You have only awakened a storm that should have remained buried. Elias smirked. Yeah. Well, we humans like storms. Oralisa stepped forward, her form radiating power. The ground beneath her feet trembled with each movement. You betray your own fear, Vorthag, she said, her voice like an echo from the stars. You would not be here if I were truly forgotten. The Exarakian fleet shifted, positioning their ships in an offensive formation. Weapons powered up, glowing with deadly energy. They were ready to strike. Vorthag's voice turned cold. This time, we will make sure you stay dead. Oralisa's wings flared wide, and with a single movement of her hand, the battlefield changed. The sky rippled as energy pulsed outward from her. The very air around them bent, warping like a hate wave across the stars. The closest Exarakian ship lost control, spinning wildly before colliding into another vessel, causing a massive explosion. Elias shielded his eyes from the bright flash. His pulse raced. This wasn't just power. This was something beyond human understanding. The Exarakians, once so confident, hesitated. Even Vorthag took a step back in his holographic projection. But then, something shifted. A massive warship emerged from hyperspace, a Doombringer-class dreadnought, the Exarakians' most powerful vessel. It was 5 times larger than the Odysseus, bristling with weapons capable of cracking planets. A warning alarm blared in Elias's earpiece. Sarah's voice came through, urgent and strained. Elias, that ship. It's charging something big. We need to get out of here. Elias looked at Oralisa. She was strong, But even she couldn't take on an entire fleet alone. "We have to go," he called to her. But she didn't move, her golden eyes locked onto the dreadnought. "No, I am done running." A blazing beam of energy erupted from the dreadnought, aimed directly at Oralisa. Elias barely had time to react. Oralisa lifted her hand. The energy beam, powerful enough to melt mountains, froze midair. It cracked like glass, then shattered into nothingness. The battlefield fell silent. Elias couldn't believe his eyes. "That's impossible." Oralisa rose higher into the air, her form glowing like a sun. "You came to destroy me, Vorthag. But now, you will understand what you feared for so long." The Exarakian fleet began to break apart. Some ships fled, their captains unwilling to face a fully awakened Celestra. Others hesitated, caught between orders and survival. But the dreadnought remained. Vorthag's voice was filled with rage. "All ships, fire everything." The sky lit up as hundreds of plasma bolts, missiles, and energy beams rained down upon Oralisa. Elias barely had time to react before Oralisa moved. With a sweep of her arm, space itself twisted. The incoming attacks curved away, redirected back toward the Exarakian fleet. Explosions blossomed across the darkness, consuming enemy ships in flames. Vorthag's face twisted in shock. "No, this cannot be." Oralisa turned toward the dreadnought. She raised her hand, and the colossal warship began to shake. The metal plating buckled as if caught in an invisible grip. "I was chained for centuries," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. "Now, it is your turn." The dreadnought crushed inward, imploding under an unseen force. In mere seconds, the most powerful ship in the Exarakian fleet was reduced to nothing but debris. Elias exhaled, staring in awe. The battle was over. The surviving Exarakian ships fled, their will to fight shattered. Lord Vorthag's hologram flickered, his face twisted in disbelief. You will regret this, human," he spat. Then the signal cut off. Oralisa slowly descended back to the ground, her glow dimming. She looked at Elias, her expression softer now. "You fought for me, even when you did not know what I was." Elias smirked, crossing his arms. "Yeah, well, humans have a habit of doing crazy things." Oralisa chuckled softly, a sound that was almost human. "Then perhaps you are more than what I thought." The battle was won, but Elias knew this was only the beginning. The Exarakians would not forget, but neither would the stars. The calm after the battle was short-lived. The quiet on the moon's surface was soon filled with a tense energy. Oralisa, the ancient titan, stood tall on the scared ground, her golden light shimmering under the distant stars. Around her, the remnants of the Exarakian fleet that had once filled the sky now began to regroup. Although many enemy ships had fled, one dark and heavy vessel still moved purposefully toward them. Elias Grant remained at Oralisa's side. His heart pounded with both relief and worry. He recalled the fierce moments of the earlier fight, when beams of energy had streaked across the void and missiles had lit up the sky. Now his thoughts were focused on the new threat approaching quickly. Over the communicator, Sarah Holt's voice came clear, steady yet edged with concern. "This new ship is different, Captain," she said. "It is larger and more powerful than any we have seen before. Its design is strange and unlike the others." Elias glanced upward. In the distance, the enemy vessel grew clearer, a massive dark structure with soft blue lights tracing its hull and mysterious symbols that glowed faintly along its surface. Its slow, deliberate advance filled him with a chill even after their recent victory. He stepped closer to Oralisa, whose deep golden eyes were fixed on the approaching ship. The Titan's voice, gentle yet full of determination, broke the silence. "They have not given up. I can feel their will to destroy us. We must stand firm, for our strength is born of hope and freedom." Even as she spoke, the enemy ship began to fire. Sharp beams of energy shot out, cutting through the space between the vessel and the moon. Elias's eyes widened as he watched the bright streaks approach. He immediately ordered, "Sarah, bring the Odysseus to a safe distance and prepare our defense systems. We must not let these beams harm us." The beams reached the area near Oralisa, and with a graceful gesture, she raised her hand. A shield of brilliant golden light spread out around her, absorbing and scattering the beams into tiny, harmless sparks. The ground trembled under the force of the impact, and small dust clouds rose from the cracked surface of the moon. Elias marveled at the sight. The memory of pulling the cursed swords from Oralisa's back was still fresh in his mind, a moment that had awakened her ancient power. Now, that power shone as a beacon in the darkness. "I have never seen anything so strong," he whispered, both in awe and in fear of what was to come. The dark ship did not slow. It began to launch a volley of missiles that shot through space like fiery arrows. Sarah's voice rang through the communicator as she expertly maneuvered the Odysseus away from the incoming threat. "Captain, the missiles are coming fast. I will do my best to dodge them." Elias stood firm, watching as Oralisa stepped forward to meet the enemy. Her large wings unfurled slowly, each movement purposeful and calm. The ancient Titan channeled her inner strength, and the shield around her grew even brighter. The missiles, speeding toward their target, hit the shield and burst into small, twinkling fragments that scattered like stars in a gentle wind. Despite the initial success, the enemy vessel pressed on with its assault. Its beams became more frequent, and the barrage of missiles increased. The dark ship's relentless attack shook the ground beneath them, and the air around the battlefield vibrated with tension. Every second seemed to stretch as Oralisa concentrated, her eyes never leaving the approaching threat. Then, the enemy vessel released a final, desperate burst of energy. A powerful beam, brighter than any before, hurtled through space toward the Titan. In that moment, time seemed to slow for Elias. He saw Oralisa close her eyes briefly, as if gathering all her remaining strength. Her shield flared with an intense, steady light. The mighty beam struck the shield and was forced back on its course, reversing its path with a force that sent sparks dancing across the void. The dark ship shuddered as the redirected energy hit its hull, and cracks began to appear along its surface. The sheer force of Oralisa's power was like a roaring fire sweeping over the battlefield. The dark vessel, once so confident in its strength, now trembled under the assault. Slowly, its bright blue glow faded, and large sections of its structure began to break away, drifting into the endless space. One by one, the remaining enemy ships changed course and followed the lead of the fallen vessel, retreating back into the distant darkness. For a long moment, silence returned. The only sound was the soft hum of energy and the distant beeping of the Odysseus' systems. Oralisa slowly lowered her hand, and the golden shield around her faded into the gentle night. The enemy was in retreat, but the Titan's eyes remained watchful. Elias stepped forward and placed a respectful hand on Oralisa's broad shoulder. "Thank you," he said quietly. His voice carried the weight of gratitude for the ancient Titan who had fought with all her might to protect them. Oralisa looked down at him, her golden eyes softening with a mixture of relief and sadness. "You have given me a chance to be free," she replied in a low voice. "But our journey is not over. The enemy will return, and we must be ready to fight for what is right." Her words, simple and clear, resonated with Elias as he felt a renewed determination growing within him. Together, they stood on the scared surface of the moon, a symbol of hope amid the darkness of space. The stars above shone a little brighter that night, as if acknowledging the courage and sacrifice that had taken place. Elias and his crew, along with Oralisa, knew that this victory was but a brief respite, a spark of light in a long struggle against a relentless enemy. The battle had tested their strength, their will, and their spirit. Yet, in that fierce confrontation, the power of hope had shone through. Elias looked up at the distant stars and promised himself that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he and his allies would stand strong. They would fight with all the courage and determination that humanity was known for. As the enemy ships disappeared into the vast emptiness of space, the moon's surface glowed softly under the touch of a new dawn. The fight on this lonely world was over for now. But the memory of the battle, the fire and fury that had lit up the sky, would inspire every soul who lived under the stars to stand up and keep the light burning. In the silence that followed the fierce battle, Elias Grant and his crew struggled to catch their breath. The dark skies above the moon still held the scars of conflict, and the distant stars seemed to watch their every move. Even though many enemy ships had retreated, Elias knew that the Xerakians were not finished yet. Rumors had reached them of a secret weapon hidden within the enemy flagship, a device capable of turning the tide of any war with its devastating power. Back aboard the Odysseus, Captain Grant gathered his trusted officers in the dim light of the command room. Sarah Holt, his steady co-pilot, and a small team of skilled fighters listened intently as he explained the plan. "We have one chance to stop their final trick," Elias said, his voice calm but full of determination. "The enemy flagship holds a doomsday weapon. If we do not act quickly, it may destroy everything we have fought for." The room grew silent. The idea of a weapon that could end lives with a single burst of energy was almost too terrible to imagine. But Elias's eyes shone with resolve. "We must stop it," he continued. "I will lead a small team to board the flagship. Our goal is to disable the weapon before it can be used." Sarah stepped forward, her tone steady. "Captain, this mission is dangerous. We do not know what traps they have set or how many men we might lose. Are you sure we should risk everything now?" Elias nodded slowly. "I know the risks, Sarah, but I also know that humanity has always stood strong in the face of danger. We have awakened an ancient power in Oralisa, and together we will fight for our future. We cannot let fear stop us." A short while later, as the Odysseus moved into a safe distance, Elias and a team of 4 brave crew members boarded a small shuttle. The shuttle was nimble and lightly armed, enough to sneak past enemy patrols. Outside, the vast form of the Xerakian flagship loomed in space. Its dark hull, marked by blue glowing symbols, was a stark contrast to the bright cosmos around it. The flagship was silent now, almost as if it were waiting. The shuttle docked with a narrow opening on the side of the ship. Elias led his team through dark corridors filled with alien markings and cold, hard metal. Every step they took was measured and quiet. The plan was to reach the central control room where the weapon's power source was located. If they could disable it, the enemy would be forced to retreat, and the threat would be over. The corridors of the flagship were long and winding. Shadows danced on the walls as the small team moved with care. Their hearts pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. The air was thick with tension, and every sound echoed in the narrow hallways. Elias's mind went back to the battles they had fought alongside Oralisa, and he felt the strength of their unity push him forward. After what felt like hours, the team finally reached a large, secure door. This door led to the engine room where the doomsday weapon was housed. Elias examined the control panel next to it. It was covered with strange symbols and flickering lights that he did not understand. With steady hands, he began to work on the panel, trying to bypass the security system. The alarm was silent, but he knew that any mistake could trigger the enemy's defenses. Minutes passed slowly. Elias's fingers trembled as he connected wires and entered codes. The room behind the door remained dark and quiet. Then, with a soft peep, the door slid open. Inside, the room was bathed in a dim blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. In the center of the room, protected by a glass case, was the power core of the weapon. It glowed with a deep, ominous light that seemed to pulse in time with the team's racing hearts. Elias signaled to his team. "This is it. Sarah, you and the others cover me. I will disable the core." With every careful move, he approached the case. His hands moved quickly to disconnect the cables that fed the core. Each cable he removed sent a small spark of energy into the air, and he knew that he was cutting off the flow of power that might soon be used for destruction. Suddenly, a loud clatter echoed in the room. The team froze. A patrol of enemy soldiers had arrived on the corridor outside, alerted by the slightest noise. Elias's heart pounded as he continued his work, knowing that every second counted. The power core's glow began to dim with each cable that was removed. Outside, the sound of heavy footsteps grew louder. Sarah's voice came softly through their comms. "Captain, we have intruders on the other side. Hurry, please." Elias took a deep breath. With one final connection undone, the glow of the core faded into darkness. He quickly closed the panel and locked the door. The weapon was disabled. In that moment, the team allowed themselves a brief sigh of relief. Their work was done, but there was no time to celebrate. The sound of approaching footsteps turned into shouts and the slam of metal doors as enemy soldiers burst into the room. Elias raised his hand, signaling his team to take cover behind nearby equipment. Bullets and energy blasts filled the corridor outside, and the team fought hard to hold their ground. The small team was outnumbered, but they had the element of surprise on their side. Elias and his team fought bravely, each man and woman defending not just their lives, but the hope of an entire people. The disabled weapon would weaken the enemy and force their hand. Slowly, the enemy soldiers retreated as the sounds of distant explosions echoed through the ship. Outside, the flagship began to falter. Its systems went dark one by one, and the enemy ships in orbit turned and fled. Back aboard the Odysseus, Sarah and the crew watched as the flagship's lights flickered and died. Captain Elias Grant's final gambit had succeeded. He had risked everything. And for a moment, humanity's future hung in the balance. Later, as the shuttle returned to the Odysseus, Elias allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He knew that the war was not yet over, and that more challenges lay ahead. But tonight, they had taken a stand. The threat of the doomsday weapon was ended, and with it, a great piece of darkness had been lifted from the stars. In the calm of that moment, with the hum of the ship and the soft glow of distant nebula outside the window, Elias felt hope. Humanity had shown its strength in the face of great danger, and the ancient power of Oralisa had joined their cause. Together, they would continue to fight for a better future, even in the vast darkness of space. The battle had taken its toll on both sides. The dark skies above the moon were still filled with drifting debris from shattered enemy ships, and the distant hum of dying engines filled the air. Oralisa, the ancient titan, now hovered above the battlefield with a calm power that contrasted with the chaos below. Her golden glow lit up the broken fragments of the Exarakian fleet as they struggled to maintain order. Elias Grant stood beside her on the cracked surface of the moon. His eyes watched as the enemy ships, once full of menace and strength, now appeared confused and scattered. The disabling of the doomsday weapon had thrown the Exarakians into disarray, and their once confident formation was falling apart. Soldiers scrambled to restore order, but the will to fight had already begun to fade. The voice of Lord Vorthag, their fearsome commander, came through the communicator one last time. "You may have delayed us, human, but our spirit is not yet broken." The words, however, sounded hollow against the overwhelming force of Oralisa's might. The commander's hologram flickered on a nearby screen before vanishing into static. Oralisa's eyes, deep and wise, met Elias's gaze. "You have done well," she said softly, her voice echoing like a gentle wind. "Today, you have shown that even in the darkest hours, hope and courage can change the tide of fate." Elias nodded, though he did not feel a moment of pride. He knew that the cost had been high. Many brave souls had fallen, and the scars of this fight would be with them forever. Yet, in that moment, hope shone bright in the hearts of those who had fought by his side. Sarah Holt's steady voice came through the communicator from the Odysseus, filled with relief and determination. "Captain, the remaining enemy ships are retreating. we have seen them turn back into the void of space. The retreat was not just a loss of ships, it was the crumbling of an empire built on fear. The Exarakians, who had long believed that strength and ruthlessness were the keys to victory, now found themselves forced to question their own resolve. In every falling star and drifting piece of metal, they saw the end of their oppressive reign. Back on the ground, a small group of enemy soldiers who had been marooned on the moon now tried to rally. They scrambled for cover behind piles of debris and twisted metal, their eyes wide with fear as they witnessed the unstoppable power of Orcs. One of them, a young soldier with trembling hands, whispered to his companion, "We fought so hard, but now we have no place to run." His words were barely audible over the sound of distant explosions and the low rumble of energy that seemed to echo the Titan's heartbeat. Elias stepped forward among his own crew. "Listen up," he called, his voice steady and clear. "This is our moment. We have shown the enemy what we are capable of. We must honor our fallen comrades and stand ready for the future. Let this day remind us that our spirit cannot be broken." The men and women around him raised their eyes, finding strength in his words. In that quiet moment, as the last of the enemy vessels disappeared into the vast darkness of space, a new resolve took root. They would rebuild, they would remember, and they would be ready should the Exarakians return. Orcs slowly descended to the ground and knelt beside Elias. "You have changed the course of destiny," she said. "The Exarakians will speak of this day for many ages to come, but know that the peace we have earned is fragile. There is still much to be done if we are to protect our home and our future." Elias placed a hand on her enormous weathered arm. "I understand," he replied. "Our fight is not over. But today we have given our people a chance to rebuild and to dream of a better tomorrow." His simple words carried the weight of every sacrifice made and every life lost in the struggle for freedom. As the first light of a new dawn began to break over the horizon, Elias and his crew made their way back to the Odysseus. The ship, battered but still determined, waited on a makeshift landing pad amid the ruins of the battlefield. Sarah and the rest of the crew were busy tending to the wounded and gathering what supplies they could salvage from the debris. There was work to be done, and every small act of repair was a step toward restoring hope. In the ship's command room, the crew gathered around a large display screen that now showed the retreating enemy fleet. The sight was bittersweet, a reminder of the hard-won victory and the heavy cost at which it came. Yet, amid the silence, there was an undercurrent of hope. They had pushed back a powerful foe and had proven that humanity, with its stubborn resilience and endless courage, could stand against even the mightiest forces in the galaxy. Elias looked out of the viewport, his eyes following the last of the enemy ships vanish into space. He thought of the people waiting back on Earth and the other colonies scattered among the stars. He knew that the story of this battle would inspire generations to come. The tale of how a brave human and an ancient Titan had joined forces to bring down an empire would be told in every corner of the galaxy. With determination burning in his heart, Elias turned to his crew and said, "We must prepare for the next challenge. Today we have taken a step toward freedom, and tomorrow we must build on that strength. Let the story of our courage be a beacon for all who believe in a better future." The crew nodded, each person understanding the importance of what lay ahead. The fall of the Exarakians was not just a victory in battle. It was a turning point, a moment when the oppressed discovered their power, and the stars shone a little brighter with the promise of hope. In that moment, as the Odysseus slowly lifted off from the scared surface of the moon, the future of humanity felt secure. They had faced fear, they had faced despair, and together they had shown that even the darkest night could be overcome by the light of a single determined soul. As the dust finally settled and the dark remnants of battle drifted away, a new dawn began to break over the scared surface of the moon. The fierce clash between humanity and the Exarakians had left deep marks on the land, but it also kindled a light of hope that now shone brighter than ever. Captain Elias Grant, standing side by side with the ancient Titan Oralisa, gazed out over the battlefield with a mix of pride and sorrow. Around them, human survivors and injured warriors worked hard to clear debris and tend to wounds. Though the price had been high, the victory was a promise of a future free from tyranny. In the days that followed, the remnants of the battle became a symbol of renewal. Makeshift shelters were built amid the ruins, and field medics, led by Sarah Holt and other trusted crew members, cared for the wounded with gentle hands and kind words. The memory of those who had fallen was honored in quiet moments of reflection. Everyone knew that the sacrifice of their comrades was not in vain. It had opened the door to freedom and a better tomorrow. Elias walked slowly through the camp, his eyes following the path of a few brave souls rebuilding a shattered wall. He paused near a small memorial, a simple stone with the names of fallen heroes etched into it. He pressed his hand against the cool surface and whispered, "Your courage will always guide us." The words carried the weight of both loss and hope, a reminder that every sacrifice was a stepping stone toward a brighter future. High above the camp, Oralisa soared on newly strengthened wings, her golden aura visible even in the soft light of the early morning. Though once a figure of ancient legends, she had now become a living symbol of strength and resilience. Her presence reassured the people. They believed that her power would protect them from future threats. The Titan's journey was not over, and she had become a wanderer among the stars, a guardian watching over all who dared to dream of freedom. Back on Earth and in distant colonies, the news of the battle spread quickly. Radio broadcasts and simple messages carried the tale of how a human captain, against overwhelming odds, had freed a forgotten Titan and turned the tide against a ruthless empire. In small towns and bustling space stations alike, people gathered to listen to the story. Parents spoke to their children of the brave deeds of Captain Elias Grant and the gentle might of Oralisa. They said, "Never forget that courage can rise even in the darkest night. A single brave act can light the way for many." Teachers in crowded classrooms would use the story as a lesson in hope and determination. When all seems lost, they explained, "It is the spirit of unity and the strength of a single heart that can change the course of history." The legend of the battle grew with each retelling, becoming a beacon of inspiration for those who felt oppressed by fear and injustice. For Captain Elias Grant, the victory was not just a military success. It was the beginning of a long journey to rebuild what had been broken. He held many meetings with his officers on the Odysseus, planning how to secure new alliances and strengthen defenses against any future attacks. In his simple, clear manner, he spoke of a future where every person could live in peace. "We have shown the enemy that we will not be broken," he declared. "Now we must show the universe that our spirit, our unity, and our hope will always guide us to a better future." Sarah Holt worked tirelessly alongside engineers and medics to ensure that every survivor received the care they needed. She took it upon herself to send detailed messages back to Earth and the colonies, telling them that hope had not been lost and that their brave men and women were working to rebuild. Her words were filled with both urgency and optimism, a call for everyone to stand together in the face of adversity. As time passed, new outposts were established on the moon's surface. The once devastated battleground slowly transformed into a place of memory and progress. Every repaired structure, every carefully tended garden, and every rebuilt corridor was a testament to the strength of humanity. The image of a brave human and a once-forgotten Titan standing together was carved into public monuments, reminding everyone of the day when hope triumphed over despair. In quiet moments at the end of long days, Captain Elias Grant would sit under the clear, starry sky, feeling the cool night airbrush against his face. He often thought of the journey that had brought him here and of the many lives that had been touched by their victory. The stars overhead shone with a renewed brilliance, as if celebrating the birth of a new legend. He knew that while the struggle for freedom might continue, the courage and unity that had emerged from this battle would never fade. And so, as the Odysseus prepared to leave the moon for its next mission, A deep sense of purpose filled the hearts of all who had witnessed the battle. The legend of Captain Elias Grant and Orlisa, the ancient Titan, would be passed down through generations, a timeless tale of bravery, unity, and the enduring power of hope. In every whispered story, in every song sung under the vast sky, the memory of that day lived on. It reminded everyone that even in the darkest of times, the light of a single determined soul could ignite a spark that would warm the hearts of an entire galaxy.